And some of the issues we have, I will give you some examples because I try to be financially responsible, but sometimes my mouth is not politically responsible. And a few years back, I lobbied hard for Wyoming contractors to get preference for Wyoming work because it belongs to the people of Wyoming. It's our money. And in the process, the way it turned out, the subcontractors truly got preference. So they do get preference for most of the work in Wyoming, but the general contractors, we provided a pathway to citizenship, if you will, for out-of-state general contractors. Actually, out-of-state generals and subs, but just because of the realities of Wyoming contractors and their size, the out-of-state subs don't come in to do the work, but the out-of-state generals do come in and use in-state subs to get the work done. So I believe that we ought to be revisiting that issue. It really resulted in one of those weird political worlds or environments where somebody in government decided the contractors were making too much money. And the only way to stem that was to let the out-of-staters come in and provide more competition in the market. Now, I don't know who gets to be the arbiter that decides who's making too much money and how much too much money is, but there are ways to do that that would be different in terms of controlling that as opposed to what we typically do, which is tied to the boom and bust cycle. So the contractors right now, we're in a down cycle. They've laid everybody off. They're down to, putting screen doors on houses and whatever they can to stay in business. And soon the state's economy will heal back up. Energy at $65 a barrel is going to help enormously. And then the state will have a lot of money. And then they're going to gear up and want to spend it on a bunch of schools or other types of buildings. And we've got a construction industry that's been decimated by no work. And then the politicians say, well, our guys can't handle it. Well, no, because you put them out of work. So it seems to me that even in good times and bad times, much like the highway department does, it would make more sense to have a program, an annual program of maybe 150, 175 million. We know from experience that keeps most of the Wyoming contractors pretty busy. So that would be a good way to start, have a regular program so everybody, families and people can plan on a regular program so they don't have to worry about being put out of work every time there's a bust in the economy, in the energy economy. And then you have to be careful because when you have lots of money, people line up and they want you to spend it faster and they want you to be prioritizing them, which is fine. But if you ramp it up from 150 to 175 to maybe 225, our guys can do that. We don't need the out-of-staters. We have enough infrastructure in place to be able to ramp it up. But we don't seem to get the disconnect there because we encourage them all to get ready. There's a lot of work coming. And they all get ramped up, and then comes the energy boom, and they have a hard time getting help because they go to the energy patch in our backyard that's huge. So we fight all of that because it's like this. It isn't constant. People can't predict they're going to have a job next year because it's all predicated on what the state does, and that's predicated on what energy does. So I think we need to revisit the preference for the general contractors. I also think we let the general contractors down. I spent 2 years going around the state telling my stuff about how they should have preference and the impact it has on Wyoming. And it comes back to this, if you do business with Wyoming people or Wyoming businesses. And every time we lose a contractor, and construction has been no different than any other industry in Wyoming, there are private equity buyers or large buyers with construction headquarters in Omaha or Denver or Salt Lake that have been buying any construction company with a gravel pit. And on the vertical side, we don't see quite as much going on there, but we continue to lose our existing contractors as they age out because the work program going forward has changed so dramatically. Even if the employees or the people looking at it could find a way to buy it, it's tough to do when you don't have a predictable revenue stream or market to look at in terms of being able to pay for it. So I think that W.E.R.S. has a lot of different areas that could make a difference in Wyoming. Everything I've just talked about is creating cash flow, channeling through Wyoming companies that are owned by a company willing to reinvest in Wyoming. And the tranches that we talked about in terms of if you're just helping a Wyoming contractor or a Wyoming business that's trying to sell to the employees, the sole purpose of the W.E.R.S. tranche, if you will, is the mezzanine capital or the missing piece that would make that a bankable loan. So we're trying to create more business for the banks. We're trying to create more business for the accountants who want to keep that business and do the books. So basically, where we let people down when it came to preference for contractors is people like me, and I was there, but there weren't bankers there. There weren't accountants there. There weren't insurance people there. All of the people that live off of those contractors weren't there to say, hey, these guys need preference. We live off of them. It was out-of-state contractors against in-state contractors, and that's not what this is about. This is about keeping money in Wyoming. So as I was telling this story recently, one of the accountants said, you know, we bid on highway department audits and different state government audits, and we never get preference. Well, why not? This is how powerful it is. Millions of dollars that we can cycle back into Wyoming. Why are we afraid to create successful businesses in Wyoming? Why do we think that people out of state are smarter or better than we are? I can tell you in the insurance business, the 2 out-of-state buyers that have bought insurance agencies have never changed an employee. It's the same Wyoming people that were working there when they bought them, other than the ones they've eliminated by attrition. So we're competing with the same types of people that we grew up competing with anyway. They're the same people that cross the street from us. They aren't more high-powered. They aren't more highly intelligent. They don't have greater skills than Wyoming people. We can compete with them. So why we don't give and encourage through any state money at any level preference for those service providers or product providers is beyond my understanding. Because when you see the power of keeping public monies belong to us, the private sector. We should have preference on those. So unfortunately, part of the W.E.R.S. deal is you get me with it. And I do have a hard time sometimes not pontificating on what looks to me like ignorance, because we talk the talk, but then when we decide something is making too much money, we decide it's time to take them down. Well, this by design is going to make a lot of money. If it doesn't, I'm not interested, right? Nobody should be, because this is a for-profit enterprise. And by design, the more it makes, the more we have to reinvest. So get used to it. That's what it's going to do. That pretty well wraps up most of what I have. Let me just check real quick.